The morning started like any other. The airport was busy but calm, with travelers dragging suitcases, checking their phones, and saying quiet goodbyes before walking toward the gate. Among them was a young boy holding his mother's hand tightly. He looked excited, his eyes full of curiosity as he stared at the airplanes outside the window. He had always loved planes. He used to sit with his father and watch them take off from a small park near their home, counting how many would disappear into the clouds. This flight wasn't supposed to be special. It was just a short trip to visit his grandparents for the weekend. But that day, destiny had other plans. The boy's mother smiled as they found their seats near the front of the aircraft. The flight attendants greeted them warmly, helping an older couple with their bags and making sure everyone was comfortable. The air smelled faintly of coffee and new leather. The captain's voice came through the speakers, calm and friendly, saying they would be in the air for just over an hour, with clear skies ahead. The passengers relaxed, fastening seatbelts, adjusting air vents, and chatting softly. The engines hummed, the plane rolled toward the runway, and soon the world outside tilted back as they climbed higher into the bright morning sky. The boy pressed his face to the window, watching the ground shrink below. Tiny roads and cars looked like toys. He whispered something about how he wanted to be a pilot one day. His mother smiled, brushing his hair gently, saying that his father would be proud to hear that. The boy's father had been a pilot once, a calm and brave man who had loved the sky more than anything. He had taught his son everything about planes, from how they lift off to how the instruments work. The boy had memorized every part of a cockpit just from looking at pictures and flight simulators on his computer. But he was only a child, and this was just a regular flight. Or so everyone thought. As the plane leveled off, the passengers settled into quiet comfort. Some read newspapers, some listened to music, and a few children were already dozing off. The flight attendants moved smoothly down the aisle with drinks and snacks, smiling and making small talk. The co-pilot peeked through the cockpit door for a moment, exchanging a quick word with one of the crew before returning to his seat. Everything felt peaceful. The boy kept watching out the window, tracing the movement of the clouds. His mother handed him a juice box and told him to sit still, but he could hardly stay still. Flying was magic to him. The way the world disappeared below the wings always made him feel like anything was possible. He looked ahead toward the cockpit door and imagined what it must be like inside. Lights blinking, dials turning, voices calmly giving directions. He didn't know that within an hour that same door would open again, but this time in panic. About 40 minutes into the flight, a soft announcement came from the cockpit. The captain said they might hit a bit of turbulence. A few passengers fastened their seatbelts again, but no one seemed worried. The plane shook lightly, then steadied. The boy laughed, thinking it felt like a roller coaster. His mother told him to hold her hand. The shaking grew stronger for a few moments, rattling the trays and overhead compartments. Then it stopped. The captain's calm voice returned, reassuring everyone that it was normal and they would be fine. The passengers relaxed again. But something else was happening inside the cockpit, something none of them could see. The captain, who had been flying for over 20 years, suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest. He tried to ignore it, focusing on the instruments, but his vision blurred. The co-pilot looked over alarmed as the captain slumped forward. The co-pilot tried to shake him, calling his name, but there was no response. He quickly grabbed the controls, activating the autopilot and calling for help over the radio. The cabin crew didn't know what was happening yet. They continued serving passengers, smiling politely, until the co-pilot burst through the cockpit door with panic in his eyes. "Is there a doctor on board?" he shouted. The entire cabin went silent. People looked around, confused and scared. A woman in the middle row raised her hand. She was a nurse. She hurried to the front as the co-pilot explained in a low voice what had happened. The nurse followed him into the cockpit. A few minutes later, she came out, her face pale. The captain wasn't responding. The co-pilot was now alone in control, and the flight attendants were told to prepare for an emergency. The passengers started whispering nervously. The boy's mother tried to stay calm, holding her son close, but her eyes showed the same fear everyone else felt. The boy looked up at her, confused. "Mom, what's happening?" he asked softly. She told him everything would be okay, but her voice trembled. The plane jolted again, a sudden drop that made everyone gasp. The co-pilot's voice came over the speakers, trying to sound calm but clearly shaken. He said there was a technical problem and they were trying to fix it. He asked everyone to remain seated and keep their seatbelts fastened. His words were meant to comfort, but they only deepened the fear. Inside the cockpit, alarms were starting to flash. The autopilot was struggling, the plane drifting slightly off course. The co-pilot tried to correct it, his hands shaking. Air traffic control was giving instructions over the radio, but he was fighting to keep the aircraft stable while dealing with the medical emergency beside him. Sweat ran down his forehead. He had been trained for difficult situations, but this was beyond anything he had faced. The captain was unconscious, the weather was changing, and panic was spreading through the cabin. Back in the passenger area, the boy's mother closed her eyes, whispering a prayer. The boy looked out the window again, but this time the clouds didn't look peaceful. They looked heavy, darker. The engines roared louder, the seatbelt sign flickered. People were crying quietly. One man was holding his wife's hand, another was trying to calm a child who wouldn't stop shaking. The flight attendants moved quickly, checking rows and trying to smile even though their faces were pale. Everyone could feel something was wrong. The air inside the plane had changed. It felt tight, like the entire cabin was holding its breath. The boy stared ahead at the cockpit door. He remembered his father's voice teaching him how pilots stayed calm, no matter what happened. "You never panic in the air," his father used to say. "You trust the process. You trust the plane. And most of all, you trust yourself." Those words echoed in his mind. He didn't understand everything that was going on, but he knew one thing for sure. Something terrible was happening, and people were scared. The co-pilot's voice came over the intercom again, breaking through the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "please stay calm. We are experiencing some control issues, but I am doing my best to stabilize the aircraft." His voice cracked slightly at the end of the sentence. That tiny crack made it clear to everyone that this was serious. Some passengers started to cry. Others closed their eyes, holding hands with strangers. The sound of the engines filled the silence. The boy looked up at his mother again. "Mom," he whispered, "the plane's not flying right." She nodded, her eyes wet, and told him to stay seated, but he couldn't look away from that door. His small hands gripped the armrest. Deep down, something inside him stirred. A memory, a spark, a strange feeling that told him he couldn't just sit there. The plane shook again, harder this time. The overhead lights flickered. The flight attendants stumbled as they tried to stay upright. The co-pilot called out from the front for everyone to brace. Some passengers screamed. The boy's heart pounded in his chest. He looked at his mother, who held him tight, whispering that she loved him no matter what happened. He wanted to believe her, but he could see the fear in her eyes. Outside the window, the clouds grew thicker. The wings trembled. The sound of the engines rose and fell unevenly. The boy's mind flashed with images of the flight simulator at home, the one his father had used to show him how to control an aircraft during emergencies. He remembered how his father used to say that sometimes, even when things seem impossible, you just have to take control. He didn't know it yet, but those memories would soon become more than just lessons. They would become the difference between life and death for everyone on board. As the plane dipped slightly and passengers cried out in fear, the boy closed his eyes, trying to remember everything his father had ever taught him. His hands trembled, but there was something steady inside him too. The moment that would change everything was only minutes away. The plane trembled again, harder this time, and the sound of the engines changed. The air inside the cabin felt heavy. People were holding their breath, gripping seats, praying quietly. The co-pilot's voice came over the speakers again, asking everyone to stay calm, but his words only made people more afraid. You could hear the strain in his voice, the pressure of being alone up front. The boy sat still beside his mother, his small fingers clutching the armrest. He could hear the flight attendants whispering near the front, their faces pale. His mother was trying to smile for him, but her eyes were full of fear. The plane dipped suddenly, then lifted again. Gasps filled the cabin. A tray of cups slid down the aisle, spilling juice and water everywhere. The air was tense and shaky, like even the walls of the plane were scared. Then the co-pilot stepped out of the cockpit. Everyone turned toward him at once. His face was tight with stress, his voice trembling as he spoke. He said the captain was unconscious and that they were trying to contact emergency help. The passengers went silent. Some began to cry quietly. A few reached for their phones, though there was no signal up here. The co-pilot told them he needed everyone to remain calm and seated. Then he turned back toward the cockpit, his steps quick and uneven. The boy's heart pounded. He couldn't see what was happening inside, but he could hear the beeping of alarms from behind that door. It was a sound he recognized. He had heard the same tone from the flight simulator his father used on his computer. That same alarm meant the plane wasn't steady. The sound sent chills down his spine. He glanced at his mother again. She was holding her head down, whispering a prayer under her breath. For a few long minutes, nothing changed. The plane continued to sway. The passengers stared at each other with quiet panic. One of the flight attendants picked up the microphone and told everyone that ground control was in contact and they were doing everything possible to keep the aircraft safe. But her voice broke halfway through the sentence, and that tiny tremble made everyone realize how serious it was. The boy could see the fear spreading through the cabin like smoke. Some people had tears in their eyes. Others just stared blankly, frozen. He felt a deep ache in his chest, that helpless feeling of knowing something terrible could happen and not being able to stop it. But he couldn't stop thinking about what his father used to say. There's always something you can do, no matter how small. You don't freeze, you think. He kept staring toward the cockpit door. His mother noticed and told him to stay still, but the thought wouldn't leave his mind. His father had shown him what all those switches meant, how the control stick moved, how altitude worked, how to balance the plane when it tilted. He remembered every detail, not because someone told him to, but because he loved it. It was like a puzzle he had always wanted to solve. Then another sharp drop came. The cabin filled with screams. Luggage shifted above, and the oxygen masks rattled in their compartments. The boy's mother grabbed his hand tight. "Don't move," she whispered. He nodded, but he could hear the panic in her voice. The plane shook again. The lights flickered. He could feel his heartbeat in his throat. At that moment, the cockpit door opened again. The co-pilot shouted something to the flight attendants. His headset was around his neck, and his face looked soaked in sweat. He said the controls were acting up, and that he couldn't stabilize the descent alone. He needed help, someone who could at least follow his instructions while he managed the radio and navigation. The boy's hand twitched. He didn't know why, but his body moved before his mind caught up. He stood up, his small figure shaking. "I can help," he said in a voice that was quiet but somehow cut through the noise. Everyone turned to look at him, a small child standing in the aisle of a shaking airplane. His mother pulled him back down instantly, whispering, "Sit down, don't say that." But the co-pilot had already turned toward the sound. "What did you say?" The co-pilot asked, his voice strained but curious. The boy swallowed hard. "I can help. My dad was a pilot. He taught me about planes. I know what those controls mean." A few passengers gasped. The mother looked horrified, shaking her head. But the co-pilot hesitated. He stared at the boy for a moment, and in that moment the plane jerked again, sending a ripple of panic down the cabin. The co-pilot looked torn, but desperation won. "Come with me," he said firmly. The boy's mother tried to stop him, pleading for her son to stay, but the co-pilot promised she would stay right outside the door and that the boy would only follow instructions, nothing more. There was no time to think. The plane was dropping slowly and alarms were blaring louder. The flight attendant helped guide the boy forward. His hands were cold, his knees trembling, but he didn't turn back. When he stepped into the cockpit, it was like walking into a different world. Lights flashed red and yellow. The captain's seat was pushed back slightly, the man still motionless. The sound of alarms echoed in his ears. The co-pilot sat down again, quickly putting his headset back on, talking to the air traffic controller. He gestured for the boy to sit in the second seat. "Listen to me carefully," the co-pilot said, his eyes never leaving the control panel. "You'll do exactly what I say, nothing more."
"Can you do that?"
The boy nodded silently. His small hands gripped the side of the seat. The co-pilot guided him through the steps. "See that lever? Keep your hand there. When I tell you, you pull it gently. Don't move it unless I say. The boy nodded again, his eyes locked on the instruments. He recognized so many of them. The artificial horizon, the speed indicator, the throttle. It was exactly like the simulator he had used at home, only now it was real. The plane was descending too quickly. The co-pilot's voice was calm but sharp. Easy now. Pull back just a little. Good, hold it there. Don't panic. We're just trying to level out. The boy's hand trembled, but he did as told. The plane's nose lifted slightly. The alarm slowed. The co-pilot looked over, surprised. Good, he said. That's good. Keep it steady. Outside the cockpit, the passengers had gone quiet. They didn't know exactly what was happening, but they could sense a shift. The turbulence felt a little lighter. The mother sat frozen, her heart pounding. Every second felt like an hour. Inside, the boy focused with everything he had. The co-pilot was talking rapidly to ground control, calling out readings, requesting emergency clearance to land at the nearest airport. The boy heard him repeat instructions, then relay small commands to him. Hold here. Now ease it down. Steady, don't fight it. Every time the plane dipped or rolled, the boy remembered his father's voice. You don't fight the sky, you guide it. He repeated those words quietly to himself. The co-pilot glanced at him once and saw the boy's lips moving, his face pale but steady. Something about that gave him hope. Minutes passed, though they felt endless. The plane was still in trouble, but it wasn't falling anymore. The descent had slowed. The co-pilot told the boy to keep his hands on the yoke, to listen for his next call. Ground control was working fast, clearing the runway for an emergency landing. Fire trucks and ambulances were already on standby. Back in the cabin, the passengers began whispering. A flight attendant quietly told the mother that her son was helping in the cockpit. The woman's face went white. She couldn't breathe for a moment. But then she looked at the window, saw the clouds clearing, and closed her eyes. She whispered, "Please, just guide him." The boy sat there, sweat dripping down his forehead, but his focus didn't break. The co-pilot gave short, clear directions. Together, they managed to keep the aircraft from tilting too far. The boy's hands hurt from holding so tightly, but he didn't let go. Every movement mattered. Every breath felt like it could change everything. Finally, the co-pilot leaned toward the radio and said the words everyone was praying for. We've stabilized the plane. The boy let out a shaky breath. The co-pilot gave him a quick look, part disbelief, part gratitude. You just helped save us from going down, he said softly. The boy didn't answer. He just stared at the sky ahead, still holding the control steady, afraid that if he let go too soon, everything would fall apart again. But deep inside, beneath all the fear and trembling, there was something else, and a quiet strength. He didn't know it yet, but that moment was only the beginning. The hardest part was still to come. The steady sound of the engines returned, but everyone knew the danger wasn't over. The co-pilot and the boy sat side by side in the cockpit. The world spread out beneath them like a map of light and clouds. The plane was holding its height now, but the co-pilot's face showed the pressure he was under. His hands moved quickly across the controls, checking readings, talking to ground control through his headset. Every few seconds, his eyes flicked toward the boy, making sure he was still following instructions. The boy's hands rested on the control column, small compared to the size of it. His palms were sweaty, but his grip was firm. He had stopped shaking now. His mind was focused completely on the instructions coming from the co-pilot and the quiet voice on the radio guiding them from the ground. He had no idea how far they were from the airport or how much fuel they had left. He only knew that he had to keep the plane level and listen carefully. Outside the cockpit, the passengers sat in silence. The air felt thick with fear and hope at the same time. A few whispered prayers. A mother hugged her child tightly. Some people held hands with strangers they had met just an hour ago. The flight attendants moved quietly through the aisle, checking seat belts and telling everyone they were preparing for an emergency landing. No one argued. No one made a sound. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the small light above the cockpit door, waiting for something, anything, to change. Inside, the co-pilot was sweating through his uniform. He was trying to stay calm for the boy's sake. "You're doing good," he said quietly, not looking away from the controls. "Just keep it steady. Don't fight the movement, guide it," the boy nodded. Those words sounded familiar. His father used to say the same thing when teaching him how to fly on the simulator. He remembered the nights when they would sit side by side, the room dark except for the glowing computer screen, pretending they were high above the clouds. His father always said flying was about trust. Trust in the plane, in the air, and in yourself. He thought about that now. The captain was still unconscious behind them, strapped into his seat. The co-pilot was talking fast to the air traffic controller, giving out numbers and codes the boy didn't understand, but he could sense the urgency in his tone. The plane needed to come down soon. The co-pilot was asking for weather updates, for wind direction, for runway length. The voice on the radio replied calmly, like it was just another day, but everyone knew this was far from normal. "All right," the co-pilot said finally, turning to the boy. "We're about 20 minutes from the airport. We'll start descending soon. You've done great so far, but this next part is the hardest." The boy nodded again, his throat dry. He wasn't sure if he could handle landing, but he didn't want to show fear. The co-pilot noticed his expression and gave a small, tired smile. "Don't worry," he said gently. "I'll be right here. Just keep listening to my voice." The boy's mother was sitting just outside the cockpit door now. One of the flight attendants had let her move closer so she could hear what was happening. She sat still, her hands pressed together tightly. Every few minutes she looked at the small crack of light from the open door and tried to catch a glimpse of her son. She couldn't see much, only the back of his head and the outline of the co-pilot leaning forward. But she could hear their voices, calm, focused. And for the first time since the panic began, she felt a tiny spark of hope. The co-pilot began preparing for descent. The boy followed each command carefully. "Ease the throttle. A little more. Good. Now keep your eyes on that horizon line. See it?" The boy nodded. "Good, keep it level. Don't let it drift too much." The plane started lowering slowly. The hum of the engines deepened. The passengers could feel the change. They were descending. The seatbelt light stayed on, and the attendants moved down the aisles, checking again that everything was secure. No one said a word. Outside the windows, the clouds thinned and patches of blue sky appeared. Below, the faint outline of land began to show. The boy glanced at the co-pilot. "How far are we?" he asked quietly. "Not far," the co-pilot replied, glancing at the radar screen. "We're almost there. You're doing amazing." The boy tried to smile, but his heart was racing. He looked out the window. The ground looked closer now, too close. The co-pilot noticed his nervous glance and said, "Don't worry about the ground yet. Focus on the horizon. That's your guide." The boy nodded again. He felt the weight of what was happening. A whole plane full of people were counting on him. He was just a child, but right now none of that mattered. He couldn't think about fear or mistakes. He had to think about what needed to be done. Minutes passed slowly. The co-pilot's voice stayed steady, even though his hands were shaking. He knew the landing would be rough. The plane had taken some damage from turbulence earlier, and one of the systems wasn't responding properly. But there was no time to fix it. They had to get down before fuel ran too low. The air traffic controller's voice came over the speaker again, calm but urgent. "You are clear to land. Runway 21 is open. Winds calm at 5 knots. Emergency crews are standing by." The co-pilot took a deep breath and turned to the boy. "Okay, this is it. We're going in. Remember what I told you, small movements, slow and gentle. Don't rush, follow my words exactly." The boy's hands tightened on the control column. The runway appeared ahead, a long gray strip surrounded by flashing lights. It looked small from up here, almost like a toy. He swallowed hard. The co-pilot started calling out instructions. "Bring the throttle down a little. Good, keep the nose level. Don't pull too much, just guide it." The engines roared as the plane tilted forward slightly. The boy could feel the pull of gravity. His stomach twisted, but he didn't let go. The co-pilot was counting out the altitude. 1,000 feet. 800. 600. And then gave another command. "All right, bring her down gently." Eyes on the runway. The passengers could see the ground rushing up toward them now. Some started whispering prayers again. Others just closed their eyes. The mother sat frozen, her hands shaking. She could hear the voice of the co-pilot calling out numbers, the boy answering softly. 400. 300. Easy now. The plane trembled. The wind pushed against them, making the aircraft sway slightly. The boy's hands moved instinctively, correcting the angle. The co-pilot looked at him, surprised again by how steady he was. "Good, hold it right there. Don't overcorrect. Just breathe. 200, 150. The co-pilot took control of the throttle. All right, together now, pull back just a bit. Good, hold. The sound that followed was deafening. The wheels hit the runway hard, bouncing once, twice. The passengers screamed. The plane tilted slightly to the left, then straightened. The co-pilot shouted, "Brakes!" and pulled back. The boy held steady, his hands gripping tight as the plane screeched along the runway. Sparks flashed under the wings as the metal ground against the tarmac. Then slowly the sound began to fade. The shaking stopped. The world went still. For a few seconds no one moved. The only sound was the soft hum of the engines winding down. Then from the back of the plane someone began to clap. Another followed. Within seconds the entire cabin was filled with cheers, tears, and applause. People hugged each other, cried into their hands, and shouted words of thanks. The co-pilot leaned back in his seat, breathing heavily. His hands were trembling, but there was a faint smile on his face. He turned toward the boy, who was still gripping the control column tightly, too stunned to move. "You did it," the co-pilot said softly. "You really did it." The boy finally let go. His arms felt weak, his body shaking now that it was over. The co-pilot called for the medical team to board immediately to help the captain. Outside, flashing red and blue lights surrounded the aircraft. When the doors opened, fresh air rushed in. The passengers stepped out one by one, some crying, others just looking up at the sky as if they couldn't believe they were still alive. The boy's mother ran forward the moment she saw him, pulling him into her arms and holding him tight. She didn't say a word. She just held him, her tears falling onto his hair. The co-pilot stood a few steps away, watching quietly. Reporters and rescue crews were gathering outside, but he didn't speak. He just looked at the boy and said quietly to one of the paramedics, "The crash was supposed to happen, but that kid, he changed everything." The boy looked up at the sky. It was calm again, bright and open. The same sky his father had loved. For a moment he thought he could almost hear his father's voice in the wind, whispering the same words he had heard so many times before. "You don't fight the sky, you guide it." He closed his eyes and smiled faintly. The boy sat quietly on the small bench near the runway, wrapped in a blanket that one of the rescue workers had placed around his shoulders. The air outside smelled of fuel and rain. Red and blue lights from emergency vehicles flashed across the wet ground, reflecting off puddles like scattered stars. The sky had darkened now, the sun hidden behind thick clouds, but the boy wasn't looking at the weather. His eyes were fixed on the plane he had just helped land, the same plane that almost fell from the sky. People were moving all around him. Paramedics rushed in and out of the aircraft. Firefighters checked the wings, making sure there was no fuel leak. The co-pilot stood near the open door, speaking to the rescue team and airport officials. Every now and then he looked toward the boy as if making sure he was still all right. The boy's mother sat beside him, holding his hand tightly. She hadn't let go since the moment they stepped out of the plane. Her face was pale, her eyes still wet with tears, but she couldn't stop smiling through them. Every few seconds she looked at her son as if to remind herself he was really there, alive and breathing. "I can't believe it's over," she whispered softly. The boy nodded but didn't say anything. His mind was still in the cockpit. He could still hear the alarms, still feel the weight of the controls under his hands, still see the runway lights rushing toward him. The whole thing felt like a dream, a strange, heavy dream that he wasn't sure he had really lived through. The co-pilot finally walked over. His uniform was wrinkled, his eyes red from exhaustion, but there was relief written all over his face. He crouched down so he was at eye level with the boy. "You did something incredible today," he said quietly. "You stayed calm when most adults couldn't. You helped me save everyone on that plane." The boy looked up at him, his voice small. "I just did what my dad taught me." The co-pilot's eyes softened. "Then your dad must have been a good man." The boy nodded. "He was a pilot too," the co-pilot smiled gently. "That makes sense now." He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "What you did up there, that took courage. Real courage. I've flown for years and I've never seen anything like it." The boy didn't know what to say. He just looked at the plane again, its nose pointed slightly down, the wheels muddy from the hard landing. He still couldn't believe they made it. Rescue workers carried the captain out on a stretcher and everyone grew quiet. The paramedics moved quickly, checking his vitals, lifting him into the ambulance. The boy's mother turned her son away from the sight, not wanting him to see. The co-pilot stood still, watching in silence. The captain had given everything for his passengers over the years, and now he was being taken away unconscious, his fate uncertain. The boy finally spoke, his voice trembling a little. "Will he be okay?" The co-pilot hesitated before answering. "They're doing everything they can," he said softly. "He's in good hands now." The boy looked down at the blanket in his lap. He wanted to believe that. He wanted everyone to be okay. A few minutes later, airport officials came over to speak with the co-pilot. Reporters were already gathering behind the security line, cameras flashing, voices rising. The boy could hear words like miracle, child pilot, and unbelievable echoing across the field. He didn't want to be in the spotlight. He just wanted to go home. But home felt far away now. After a while, a man from the airline approached, introducing himself gently. He thanked the boy and his mother for their bravery and told them they would be taken to a quiet office to rest until everything was settled. The boy didn't respond. He just followed his mother as they were guided toward a small building near the runway. Inside, everything was calm. There were couches, warm lights, and the smell of coffee. The mother sat beside her son again, brushing a hand through his hair. "You were so brave," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You saved all of us." The boy looked up. "I didn't save everyone," he said quietly. "The co-pilot did most of it." His mother smiled softly. "He might have been the one in charge, but he couldn't have done it alone." The boy didn't answer. He still didn't feel like a hero. He was just glad the plane had landed. Glad that he could sit here now, holding his mother's hand, breathing normal air. After some time, the co-pilot entered the room. He looked calmer now, though exhaustion was clear on his face. He sat across from them and smiled faintly. "They're taking the captain to the hospital in the city. It looks like he's stable now. They think he's going to pull through." The boy's eyes brightened a little. "Really?" The co-pilot nodded. "Yeah, he's a tough man. He'll make it." The boy let out a deep breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The co-pilot leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "They're calling it a miracle," he said after a moment. "The tower said the plane was too low, too unstable. They didn't think we'd make it to the runway." He looked at the boy. "But somehow we did." The boy looked down at his hands. They still felt heavy, like he could feel the controls there. "I was scared," he admitted quietly. The co-pilot smiled. "You're supposed to be. Everyone was scared. What matters is, you didn't let it stop you." Outside the office window, the runway lights were still glowing. The sky had turned a deep gray and raindrops began to tap softly against the glass. The world was calm again. It was strange to think that only an hour ago, that same world had been seconds from disaster. The boy stood up and walked closer to the window. He watched as the emergency trucks drove slowly away, their flashing lights fading in the distance. The rain was falling harder now, but it sounded peaceful. He thought about the moment when the co-pilot told him to pull back, about how he could hear his father's voice in his head telling him to trust himself. Maybe his father had been with him somehow, not in the cockpit but in his heart. That thought made his chest feel warm even as the world outside was cold. The co-pilot stood beside him at the window. "You know," he said softly, "not many people could have done what you did. Even adults panic when things go wrong up there. But you didn't." The boy kept his eyes on the rain. "I just kept thinking about what my dad taught me." The co-pilot nodded. "He taught you well." For a moment they stood there in silence, watching the wet runway shimmer under the lights. Later that night, as the boy and his mother were taken to a nearby hotel arranged by the airline, the news had already spread across the country. Every television channel showed footage of the plane, the emergency vehicles, the rescue teams. Headlines called it the miracle landing. They spoke about the bravery of the crew and the courage of a child who helped bring a plane down safely when all hope seemed lost. The boy saw none of it. He was lying in bed at the hotel, too tired to move. His mother sat beside him, running her hand through his hair until he drifted off to sleep. He didn't dream that night. His mind was too full, too heavy. But before he fell asleep completely, he thought he heard his father's voice again. Faint, calm, and proud. "You did well, kid. You did really well." The next morning, the sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in days. When the boy and his mother went back to the airport for the debriefing, cameras flashed as soon as they stepped inside. People clapped, shouted questions, and tried to take pictures. The boy hid slightly behind his mother, uncomfortable with all the attention. He didn't understand why everyone was looking at him. The co-pilot met them in the corner of the terminal, smiling warmly. You ready? He asked quietly. The boy nodded. As they sat down with investigators and airline officials, the co-pilot explained everything that had happened. He told them about the moment the captain collapsed, about how he almost lost control, and about the young boy who stepped forward when no one else could. The officials listened in silence, some shaking their heads in disbelief. When the co-pilot finished, one of the investigators turned to the boy and said softly, "You helped save more than 100 lives that day. Don't ever forget that." The boy looked down, unsure how to respond. "I just did what I could," he said quietly. The man smiled. Sometimes that's exactly what a hero does. Later, as they left the room, the co-pilot knelt beside him one last time. "You know," he said, "there's a saying pilots use, flying is hours of calm, followed by moments that test everything you are. You passed that test, even when you didn't have to." The boy didn't say anything. He just looked out the window again, where a new plane was taking off into the morning sky. Its wings glinted in the sunlight, and for the first time since the crash, he smiled. Somehow he knew his father was smiling too. The boy woke up early that morning, long before the sun had fully risen. The air outside was calm, the sky painted with soft shades of orange and gold. For the first time in days, he felt rested. The hum of city traffic drifted faintly through the hotel window, but it sounded peaceful, not frightening like the roar of engines he still heard in his dreams. His mother was still asleep beside him, her hand resting gently over his. The events of the past 2 days felt like a blur. The flight, the fall, the landing, and everything that came after. It was strange how something that happened in just a few hours could change a person's whole life. He got up quietly, careful not to wake her, and walked toward the window. Below, he could see the airport in the distance. Planes were already taking off one after another, their wings glimmering in the sunlight. Watching them didn't scare him anymore. He just stood there for a while, lost in thought, remembering every second inside that cockpit. There was a soft knock at the door. His mother stirred and sat up, startled at first but quickly realizing it wasn't another alarm or emergency. She opened the door and the co-pilot stood there, still in uniform, but looking more rested than before. "Good morning," he said gently. "I didn't mean to wake you. I just wanted to check in before heading to the hospital." His mother smiled faintly. "The hospital?" He nodded. "The captain's awake. He asked to see both of you." The boy's eyes widened. "He's okay?" The co-pilot smiled. "A little weak, but yes, he made it through the night." A few hours later, they were on their way to the hospital. The ride was quiet, the kind of silence filled with thoughts no one says out loud. When they arrived, nurses guided them through the hallways. Everything smelled clean and sharp, and the sound of heart monitors echoed softly through the rooms. The captain was sitting up in bed when they entered. His face was pale, his voice hoarse, but when he saw the boy, a faint smile appeared. "So," he said slowly, "you're the one who kept my plane in the air." The boy hesitated, unsure what to say. "I just helped a little," he said quietly. The captain chuckled weakly. "A little? Son, you helped save 100 lives." The co-pilot stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, smiling quietly. The captain turned his eyes toward him. "You did well too," he said softly. "I'm proud of both of you." The room was quiet for a moment, filled only with the steady beeping of the monitor. The boy's mother squeezed her son's shoulder gently. The captain motioned for the boy to come closer. "You've got a pilot's heart," he said with a raspy laugh. "Steady, calm, and brave. Don't ever lose that." The boy nodded, and for the first time since the landing, he smiled without fear. When they left the hospital, reporters were already outside waiting again. Cameras flashed, microphones waved, and voices called out questions. "How did it feel? What went through your mind? Were you scared?" The boy stayed close to his mother, letting her answer most of the questions. He wasn't sure what to say. He wasn't looking for attention. He was just glad everyone was alive. The airline later arranged a small ceremony at the airport to honor the crew and passengers. It wasn't a big fancy event, just a quiet gathering near one of the hangars. The captain, now recovering well, joined them in a wheelchair, smiling proudly as he greeted each crew member. The boy and his mother sat in the front row. When the co-pilot spoke, his voice was calm and emotional. "There are moments in life when you realize how fragile everything is," he said. "That day we were seconds from disaster, but in the middle of that fear, A young boy stood up and reminded us all what courage looks like. Sometimes heroes don't wear uniforms. Sometimes they're just ordinary people who do something extraordinary. The crowd clapped softly. The boy lowered his head, embarrassed but touched. After the ceremony, a few pilots came over to shake his hand. One of them, an older man with gray hair, smiled warmly and said, "If you ever want to learn how to fly for real, you come find me. You've already got the heart for it." The boy smiled shyly but didn't say much. That evening, they were finally on their way home. As the car drove along the highway, the boy looked out at the setting sun. The sky was glowing orange again, like it had been on the day of the flight. For a moment, he closed his eyes and imagined himself back in that cockpit. The weight of the controls, the voice of the co-pilot guiding him, the sound of the wind rushing outside. But this time there was no fear, only peace. When they reached home, the neighbors came out to greet them. Some had seen the news. Others had heard from friends. They brought food, flowers, and warm hugs. Everyone wanted to hear the story, but the boy only smiled politely and said, "It was scary, but we made it." He didn't need to tell the details. The world already knew. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, his mother tucked him into bed. She kissed his forehead softly and whispered, "I'm so proud of you." The boy smiled sleepily. "Do you think Dad would be proud too?" Her eyes softened. "He'd be the proudest of all." He nodded, closing his eyes. "I felt like he was there," he murmured. "When I was flying, I heard his voice telling me what to do." His mother brushed his hair gently. "Maybe he was," she said softly. "Sometimes love doesn't leave us. It just finds new ways to guide us." The boy drifted off to sleep with those words in his heart. The next morning, he woke up to the sound of birds outside the window. The fear that had lived inside him since the flight was finally gone. He got up, opened the curtains, and watched a small plane pass far in the distance, leaving a white line across the sky. For the first time, he smiled when he saw it. Days turned into weeks. Life slowly returned to normal. The airline sent him a thank you letter and a small gift. A framed certificate signed by the captain and co-pilot, with a line that read, "For extraordinary courage and calm beyond your years." It hung on the wall above his desk, right next to the photo of his father in his pilot uniform. Sometimes, when his friends came over, they asked him about it. He would laugh and say, "It's a long story." But deep down, he knew it wasn't just a story. It was a reminder that courage doesn't always mean being fearless. Sometimes it means being scared and still choosing to help anyway. Months later, the airline invited them for a tour of the cockpit on another flight. The co-pilot, now promoted to captain, was the one flying that day. When the boy stepped into the cockpit again, his heart raced for a second, but then he felt something calm wash over him. The dials, the levers, the sound of the engines. It all felt familiar now. The new captain smiled at him. "You remember where you sat?" The boy nodded, his hand brushing over the seat where he had once gripped the controls so tightly. "I remember everything." The captain leaned closer and whispered, "Next time, maybe you'll be sitting here as a pilot." The boy smiled. Maybe. When the plane took off, he watched the ground fall away beneath them. The clouds opened up like soft white mountains and sunlight spilled through the window. He felt something inside him, a mix of peace, pride, and hope. The sky no longer felt like a place of danger. It felt like home. Years later, people still remembered that flight. The story became one of those tales shared by travelers, a story about how a child's calmness saved 100 lives when everything seemed lost. Some called it luck, others called it fate. But for those who were there, it was something more. It was proof that even in the darkest moments, light can come from the most unexpected places, and somewhere high above the clouds, a young boy who once took control of a falling plane now dreamed of flying again, not out of fear, but out of love for the skies his father had taught him to admire. Because sometimes the crash isn't what defines you, it's how you rise from it that truly tells your story.